Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving deep into a topic that really sits at the heart of democratic systems, election integrity.
Yeah, absolutely.
We pulled together a pretty fascinating stack of sources for this. You'll find everything from news reports, interviews, legal discussions, political commentary,
Mm,
and they all kind of circle around these claims and counterclaims, voter fraud, political targeting, and just the broader challenges of trying to run a fair election.
right. And our mission here really is to unpack these different accounts for you. We want to help you understand the specific allegations, who's involved, the people, the organizations, and what these different viewpoints tell us about just how complex ensuring free and fair elections actually is.
Definitely. It's sensitive ground, we know that.
Hmm.
So our goal is just to lay out what was said in the sources, clearly impartially. That's it.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's kick off with a pretty significant claim. We have to go back to around November 14th, 2016. This is when Greg Phillips from an organization called Jump Vote, they focus on voter data analysis.
Right, I remember that name.
Yeah, he put out this really striking assertion. Phillips stated that they analyze a database like 180 million voter registrations.
Huge database.
Massive. And he claimed, quote, the number of non-citizen votes exceeds 3 million.
3 million.
Yeah. And he also mentioned intending to team up with True the Vote to pursue this claim.
Okay.
So let's unpack this a bit. A claim of 3 million non-citizen votes out of 180 million registrations. That's a huge number. What does a claim like that suggest about the voting process itself?
Well, it's fascinating, right? Because the method described is database analysis.
Mm.
And this kind of claim and how it gets verified or disputed, it often comes down to looking at how these voter registration databases are actually maintained.
How clean the data is.
Exactly, and how they're cross-referenced, or if they're cross-referenced effectively with things like, say, citizenship records. The scale alone makes it incredibly complex.
Right. And you can see how errors or mismatches could happen just because of the sheer volume.
Precisely. Innocent errors versus actual fraud, that becomes the central debate.
Yeah.
And it leads right into the next part of the story, doesn't it? With True the Vote.
It does. Because organizations trying to dig into claims like these, like True the Vote, sometimes find themselves under scrutiny too.
Mm-hmm.
Which brings us to their, well, pretty long legal fight with the IRS. Catherine Engelbrecht, she's the founder of True the Vote, a conservative group.
Yeah, she's spoken a lot about this.
She has. They sued the IRS, alleging they were unfairly targeted, delays in processing their application, harassing questions, probing. They even said unconstitutional requests for information.
And there was a key legal development there, wasn't there? I mean, federal appeals court actually stepped in.
That's right. They reinstated the lawsuits. The court basically said the IRS hadn't proven it had actually stopped the discriminatory practices True the Vote was claiming.
So the case could move forward.
Exactly. Engelbrecht called it a long, long 6-year-plus road. And she said they wanted to get back to the district court to, quote, get to discovery to understand who knew what when.
Right, trying to find out the specifics behind the alleged targeting.
And here's where it gets really interesting, I think. The kind of information the IRS allegedly asked for.
Yeah.
According to Engelbrecht, it wasn't just financial stuff. She stated the IRS asked for, quote, every Twitter posting I'd ever posted, every Facebook posting I'd ever made.
Wow. Social media history.
Yeah, and also every group I'd ever spoken to since the inception of the organization and what I said and where I intended to speak in the next year.
Okay, that does seem broad.
Her argument was that these questions went far beyond determination of financial responsibility. She even suggested, quote, other agencies colluding in this same scandal.
And wasn't there a timing issue with their tax-exempt status?
Yeah, interestingly, true, the vote got its tax-exempt status right around the time they were prepping the lawsuit, but they didn't drop the suit.
So they pushed forward anyway.
They did. Engelbrecht framed the lawsuit's goal quite broadly to, quote, represent many, many, many hundreds of pro-liberty organizations that this administration successfully silenced.
So a wider principle at stake for them.
Seems like it. She also mentioned the cost, lucky to have pro bono lawyers, but still needing support just to keep the lights on for their main work, separate from the lawsuit itself.
Right, the operational costs.
And she made a point about Lois Lerner, who used to head the IRS division handling tax-exempt status during that time.
Ah, yes, a central figure in that whole controversy.
Engelbrecht noted Lerner was, quote, still drawing a paycheck and living in a $3 million mansion, often used to imply, a lack of consequences.
Right, the crime pays kind of sentiment.
So when you hear about these detailed requests, social media, future speeches allegedly coming from the IRS, what does that suggest about the nature of this alleged targeting? It seems to go beyond just checking the books.
Well, it definitely raises an important question, doesn't it? When any organization, left, right, or center, alleges that government agencies are engaged in politically motivated inquiries,
Yeah.
it forces us to look hard at the checks and balances within the system. What's in place to prevent that? And you have to consider the potential chilling effect this could have on civil liberties, on free expression, if groups feel they might be targeted for their views.
A chilling effect, right. Makes sense.
And the story around Engelbrecht didn't end with the IRS, did it?
Yeah.
There was another conflict.
No, it didn't. She also filed a formal ethics complaint against a member of Congress, Representative Elijah Cummings. She accused him of intimidation.
Which he denied, I recall.
He did. So here's what she alleged. Starting back in October 2012, Cummings sent 3 letters using House Oversight Committee letterhead.
Okay. Official letterhead.
Right, asserting he was opening an investigation into True the Vote. But the way Engelbrecht said she found out about it is interesting. Not directly from Cummings' office, but from an LA Times reporter calling her for comment.
After he'd already gone public.
Apparently so. She said he was already on cable news discussing True the Vote, using what she called fundamentally flawed information, and hadn't even contacted her first.
Okay, that's quite a claim about the process. What was Cummings' side of that?
His defense was that he was acting as the ranking member of the committee, just like the chairman, Mr. Issa, might, and his goal was to protect the right to vote. He said he didn't do anything differently.
So, standard oversight work, from his perspective.
That was his stated view. Engelbrecht, though, countered that. She believed he went public to get a, quote, really healthy publicity bump. And she emphasized her status at the time, quote, a private citizen, not a government employee, not an appointee. She pointed out she didn't even have her nonprofit status approved yet.
So, questioning the basis or the target of a congressional inquiry.
Exactly. She framed it much more broadly, calling it the weaponizing of government and suggesting it, quote, goes very deep into the West Wing of the White House.
Strong words. Did she mention other instances?
She did. She listed other experiences she viewed as targeting. 6 FBI visits, 2 ATF visits, personal audits, business audits, and OSHA visits.
Wow, that's quite a list.
It is. So what does this all mean? When you have these kinds of allegations using official positions, potentially impacting private citizens, what's really at stake in these clashes between, say, oversight committees and advocacy groups?
Well, connecting it back to the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Regardless of anyone's politics, right? The core idea that government power might be used to target organizations or individuals. That raises fundamental questions.
Like what?
Questions about due process, about protecting constitutional rights. It really makes you scrutinize the mechanisms we have in place or are supposed to have to prevent those kinds of abuses.
So it's about trust in institutions, ultimately.
In large part, yes. And the potential, again, for that chilling effect on people participating, speaking out, organizing.
Okay. Let's shift gears a bit, but stay on the theme of election integrity concerns. Let's talk about ACORN.
Ah, ACORN. The Association of Community Organizations for Reform now. Yes, that was a big story for a while.
It really was. They focused on community organizing, voter registration drives, but they ended up facing investigations in quite a few states: Nevada, Connecticut, Missouri. The sources say at least a half dozen other states.
And what were the allegations specifically?
Submitting false voter registration cards, things like duplicates or potentially fake information.
And the FBI got involved too, didn't they?
They did. The Associated Press reported back then that the FBI was looking into whether ACORN was potentially behind a nationwide effort to commit voter registration fraud.
Nationwide scope.
And it even became a flashpoint in the 2008 presidential debates.
Right, between McCain and Obama.
Exactly. John McCain directly questioned, quote, the full extent of Senator Obama's relationship with ACORN, who is now on the verge of maybe perpetrating one of the greatest frauds in voter history in this country. Pretty strong accusation.
Very strong. How did Obama respond to that?
Obama stated his only involvement with ACORN was from his time as a lawyer, representing them alongside the U.S. Justice Department, actually, to make Illinois implement a motor voter law.
Ah, the law helping people register at DMVs.
Correct. That was his stated connection.
And what was ACORN's own defense against these fraud allegations?
They basically said that, look, the vast majority of its workers are conscientious, but acknowledged that with large drives, some workers might have turned in duplicates or provided fake info, sort of acknowledging potential issues with scale and oversight.
The challenge of managing large numbers of temporary workers, perhaps.
Perhaps. There was also controversy around their hiring practices, specifically questions about hiring people who had been imprisoned for identity theft.
Oh, right. How did they address that?
The defense mentioned in the sources was that these individuals were part of a state furlough program when they were hired.
Okay, so the specific context there.
And then there's this other quote that got a lot of attention, attributed to Zach Plett. He was apparently executive director of both Acorn and Project Vote back in 2008.
Okay, what was the quote?
It was claimed, he said, they had a once-in-a-generation opportunity, not, he specified, just to elect a black president, but, quote, to pass socialism to fundamentally change the way we were doing things, and Barack Obama was just a conduit to do it.
Wow. Okay, that's a very politically charged statement attributed to him.
Highly charged, and the reaction to that quote itself became part of the whole Acorn narrative.
I can imagine.
So, okay, let's unpack the Acorn situation. It clearly highlights the challenges of doing massive voter registration drives. You have the goal of getting more people registered, but then you have these accusations of fraud and intense political blowback. What does this whole episode reveal about that intersection, grassroots organizing versus election integrity concerns?
What's really fascinating there, I think, is how the Acorn story throws that tension into sharp relief. The tension between making it easier for people to vote, boosting access,
Yeah.
and the absolute need to prevent errors or outright fraud in the registration process. It really underscores how difficult it is to guarantee accuracy and prevent misconduct when you're dealing with huge decentralized efforts, often relying on temporary staff.
It's that balancing act.
Exactly. It shows how organizations walking that line between mobilizing voters and ensuring rock-solid data integrity can become targets,
Right.
rightly or wrongly.
Right. Which leads us maybe to the broader question a lot of people have, especially around election time, the underlying anxiety. Can we be sure the election won't be rigged or stolen?
Yeah, that's the big one.
And our sources touch on this from different angles. You have former President Obama, for instance, addressing rigging concerns. He actually said that in a state like Ohio, quote, Democrats in charge of the machines.
Oh, interesting acknowledgement.
Yeah, and he added, it's not as if it's just Republicans who have monkeyed around with elections in the past. Sometimes Democrats have to. But then he emphasized that no serious person out there who would suggest somehow that you could even rig America's elections, partly because they're so decentralized.
The decentralization argument makes sense.
Yeah, the sheer number of votes involved. He said there's no evidence that that has happened in the past, or that there is a viable way to do it on a large scale. And he also mentioned his own past work on voting rights law, like helping people register at DMVs.
So, acknowledging potential past issues on both sides, but ultimately expressing confidence in the overall system's resilience against large-scale rigging.
That seems to be his take. But then you have a very different perspective becoming prominent, Donald Trump's rig system claim.
Right, that was absolutely a centerpiece in his campaign, as the sources put it.
And this narrative wasn't just general. It branched out into specific accusations. For example, one report mentioned claimed that 16 U.S. states have used voting machines tied to leftist billionaire George Soros in the past.
Ah, the Soros connection claims,
Yeah.
linking voting technology to political figures.
Exactly. And it went beyond machines. There was discussion of an FEC complaint mentioned in the sources.
Okay, what did that allege?
It alleged that a group linked to Soros was using money to pay mentally ill people and homeless people to show up at Trump events, cause violence.
Main protesters, that's a serious allegation.
Yes, and handing them, quote, homemade-looking signs that say Trump is a racist. The source explicitly compared this to dirty tricks George Soros used 2 years ago in the European parliamentary elections.
So alleging orchestrated disruption and tying it to international political tactics.
Right. And then another layer gets added, claims of media complicity.
How so?
One source contained a statement asserting that the New York Times has come out and directly disavowed any journalistic standards. They say, we're not going to be fair. We're taking down Donald Trump because, in our view, he's a demagogue. Never mind that the voters have the choice.
Wow. So accusing a major news outlet of abandoning objectivity to pursue a political goal.
That was the claim presented. So here's where it gets really interesting, I think. The conversation expands massively, right?
Hmm.
It goes from specific things like non-citizen votes or voter registration cards to this much broader idea of a rigged system. And that umbrella covers everything from voting machines to funding protests to media bias. How do all these different claims kind of weave together to create this overall narrative about whether an election is fair or not?
Yeah, that's a really important question. When such a wide array of concerns get pulled into the discussion, technology, money and politics, protest tactics, media coverage, it really challenges us as citizens, doesn't it?
How do you mean?
Well, it challenges us to distinguish carefully between different types of claims. What's an anecdotal report? What's a formal investigation? What's a broader theory about systemic manipulation? It really invites critical thinking about the sources of information, the evidence presented for each piece, and how they all fit, or maybe don't fit, together.
Sorting through the noise, basically.
Exactly. And understanding how these different elements build that larger narrative about election integrity or the perceived lack thereof.
Okay, so we've definitely navigated a complex landscape today. We've gone from claims of millions of illegal votes to allegations of targeted IRS investigations and congressional intimidation.
And the Acorn controversy over voter registration.
Right, and finally, these broader concerns about rigged systems involving everything from voting machines to media narratives. This deep dive has really tried to explore the specific details laid out in the sources we had.
Yeah, revealing that intense scrutiny and just the sheer diversity of perspectives that all focus on this core democratic process.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. And maybe that leads to a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over.
Okay.
Given these conflicting accounts we've discussed, the deeply held beliefs on different sides, and all the specific details presented in these sources about fairness, about targeting, how might citizens, like regardless of where they stand politically, how might we all proactively engage with and evaluate information about election integrity
Engage in a way that... What?
in a way that actually strengthens trust and participation in the democratic process rather than, eroding it further? How do we navigate this complex information landscape constructively?
That's a really good question to leave people with. How to build trust when the information itself feels so
Right.
contested.
Exactly. Something to think about.